video lecture series for Introduction to Philosophy. In our previous video, we went over some basic points about the structure and motivation of cosmological arguments. In this video, we're going to look at one version of the cosmological argument in particular, and that is the argument from causation as given by St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, this argument it comes at the very beginning of his famous work, the Summa Theologica, and is actually one of the 5 ways that he gives of proving God's existence. Specifically, it's the second way. I have the entire argument in this passage here, but instead of reading through, I want to break down each component of it. We'll take it step by step, and we'll get a full outline of how Aquinas reasons to the existence of God. So the first thing to notice is that at the very beginning of the argument, he says, the second way is taken from the idea of efficient cause. For we find that there is among material things a regular order of efficient causes. So before we can understand the argument, we first need to know what is this concept of an efficient cause. And this is actually a concept that he takes from Aristotle. Aristotle held that there were 4 different kinds of causes, and one of those causes is what he called efficient causation. So here's one way he describes it. Aristotle tells us an efficient cause is the primary source of change or coming to rest. The man who gave advice is a cause, the father is a cause of the child. So anything which brings about a change to anything else, we call an efficient cause. So when you have a billiard cue and you hit the ball and it goes off a certain direction, a certain speed, a certain velocity, we say the hitting of the ball by the cue, that was the efficient cause of the movement of the ball. If you watch this video and you hear me going over Aquinas' argument from causation, and you learn something about cosmological arguments, then you might say that I was the efficient cause of the knowledge that you now have on this subject matter. So an efficient cause is just the source of change of anything. Now, the way Aquinas uses this idea of efficient causation is, let's recall what he says here. He says, we find that there is among material things a regular order of efficient causes. You'll remember from the previous video that we said all cosmological arguments begin with a set of premises that outline certain facts about the universe or the material world. And here's the first one of those facts that Aquinas picks up on. If we look out into the world, we see that physical or material things exist in a relationship where one causes the other. A parent is the cause of a child, right? Seeds are the cause of plants, right? Putting parts together is the cause of a car, right? You can come up with many, many examples, and these things go on in chains of causation. So if you think about the moment you are at right now, where you're listening to this video, and you think about what it was that caused you or motivated you to do that, and what caused you to do the action before that one, and before that one, and before that one, you can bring a sort of chain of causation that brought you to the moment you're at right now. For instance, you might start in the morning, at the beginning of the day, your alarm clock goes off, it causes you to wake up. You have a feeling of hunger that causes you to go get breakfast. You remember that you have work to do for this class. It causes you to open up your laptop, which then causes, that same motivation causes you to watch this video. So not only do we see causation in the universe, we see that material things exist in this regular order of efficient causes, whether those material things are our bodies, or in the biological world, or they're man-made artifacts. They all exist in this regular order, where A causes B causes C, for instance. So this is the first fundamental claim. But for us, the really important point is, okay, this is not a super controversial claim. Most people would accept that there is a physical order and that things in that physical order do exist in a chain of efficient causation. But the question is, where did this chain of causation come from? What got the whole chain going? Where did the things within the chain get their first existence? So the second claim that Aquinas makes starts to get at this point. So he says the following: but we do not find, nor indeed is it possible, that anything is the efficient cause of itself. So the first possibility you might say, well, okay, where did all these things come from, right? Of course some things were caused by other material things, But you might say, okay, well, A caused B and B caused C, and maybe where did C come from? Well, it's explained by B. Where did B come from? Well, that's explained by A. But maybe A, maybe that caused itself. Maybe A brought itself into existence. So maybe at least some of the things in the causal chain are such that they are the cause or explanation of their own existence. So this is a possibility. And the reason Aquinas is considering this possibility is because, as we will see, he's trying to get to the idea that there must be this first efficient cause. There must be a sort of first efficient cause, and based on what that cause must be like, he's going to argue that we have good reason to think that first efficient cause is God. But you might put a stop to that reasoning by saying, you know what, no, we don't need to posit God. Some things can just cause themselves. And for this reason, we see in the second premise of the argument that what Aquinas is claiming is that no material thing can be the efficient cause of itself. So if you take the chain of causes, if you have a car, and you take the chain of causes that brought that car about, whether it was the immediate construction of the car in the factory, whether it was the long chain of events going back in history that brought those parts together, right? And which would include not only the people building them, but also the raw materials and molecules that were needed for anything to exist at the beginning of the universe. His claim is that nothing in that chain of material causes can be the efficient cause of itself. So our first question should be, well, why is that? What is wrong with self-causation? Why can't that be an option? So let's take a look at the way in which Aquinas justifies this claim. So why is it that nothing can be the efficient cause of itself? He tells us, for in that case, it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. His idea here is that nothing can be the efficient cause of itself because that simply misunderstands the nature of efficient causation. So consider the relationship between cause and effect. If there is some cause of an event X at time 1, which brings about an effect E at time 2, where X begins to exist, what we notice about phenomena like that is that the cause of X always exists prior to the effect, which is X coming into existence. Now, imagine we allow for self-causation. So imagine we accept that causes are always prior in time to their effects. You always first have the cause, then you have the effect. But then we say, well, maybe there is the possibility of self-causation. Some things can be the efficient causes of themselves. And let's just take a simple example. Let's say you were to make the claim, you know what, Ryan wasn't caused to exist by his parents. No, in fact, Ryan caused himself. Well, what would that mean? Well, it would mean Ryan is both the cause and the effect. Because if Ryan was self-caused, that means he brought himself about, so he did the causation, and he was the effect, he was the end result. But what would that mean? Well, we just said all causes are prior to their effects. So that would mean the following. To be the cause, Ryan would have to exist at time 1, and because Ryan is causing himself, Ryan would also have had to begin existing at time 2. And that would be very, very strange because it would imply the following. It would imply that Ryan had to exist before he came into existence. Ryan had to first exist to be a causer, and because Ryan's also the effect, Ryan had to come into existence after he had done the causing. And this is why I'm saying, if we accept this idea of self-causation, we'd have to literally think that something can already exist before it actually exists. And Aquinas is saying that's just fundamentally absurd. That's fundamentally impossible. That's actually the word he uses. He uses the word impossible here. And so he's making the fundamental claim about the nature of causation. If C is the efficient cause of E's existence, then C must have existed prior to E. Causes always need to exist before their effects. And so that means nothing can be self-caused. Now I want to highlight one further point here. he's not just saying, right, so he is saying that all material, all physical things cannot cause themselves, but it's not just because they're material, it's not just because they're physical. He's given a conceptual argument here. He's saying that the very idea of self-causation is itself incoherent. And it'll be important to keep this in mind because that implies that absolutely nothing can be the cause of itself. And this will be important to keep in mind when we start to think about, well, the first cause, God, how in fact did that come about? Okay, but for the moment we'll put that aside. His claim is that if we want to explain where these causal chains came from, what got causation, what got motion and change going, it can't be that something in the chain was the cause of itself. Alright, but there's another possibility. You might say, okay, I grant that no material thing can be the cause of itself. That's fine. But instead of saying that there's a first efficient cause, that there's some sort of first cause which Aquinas would identify as God, why don't we just say that these chains of causation existed forever? That they were eternal? Why can't it just proceed to infinity? So in my chart here I have A causes B, which causes C, and we only go back to A, but why couldn't it just be the case that A was caused by something else, which was caused by something else, which was caused by something else, on and on forever? Why can't the universe fundamentally be infinite? Well, we see here Aquinas rejects this possibility as well. His third premise of the argument, after he said that material things exist within a chain of efficient causes, no material thing can be the efficient cause of itself, third premise is the chain of efficient causes cannot extend back infinitely. The universe cannot be infinite. And this is probably one of the most fundamental claims of all cosmological arguments. Because all cosmological arguments are going to, in some sense, argue the universe needs an explanation, it needs a cause, and that cause has to be something like God. But of course, that would be a problem if the universe is infinite. If the universe is an infinite chain of events with no beginning, it just always existed, then you don't need another being to explain where things came from. You just simply go back and back and back and back, and everything has an explanation with no beginning. But of course, we see here Aquinas rejecting this possibility as well. And we should take a very close look at how he argues for this claim. So here is Aquinas' justification for why the universe cannot be infinite. He tells us, for if we arrange in order all efficient causes, the first is the cause of the intermediate, and the intermediate the cause of the last, whether the intermediate be many or only one. So first, before I continue on, he's just asking you to imagine the following thing. Imagine a chain of causes where there's a first cause, some sort of intermediate cause, and a last cause. So there's a thing that first happens, another thing that happens in the middle, or it could be many things happening in the middle, and then something that happens at the end. So imagine that in your mind. Okay. So he says then, but if we remove a cause, the effect is removed. Okay, and this makes sense, right? So if you imagine taking a cause that did exist in the universe and then taking it out of existence, its effect would also have to be removed as well. So just to take a simple example, if you take away the factory from which your car was built, then your car wouldn't exist. If you imagine that my parents never met or my parents did not exist, then I would not exist. So you can do this with any cause and any effect. So he says, but if we remove the cause, the effect is removed. Therefore, if there is no first among efficient causes, neither will there be a last or an intermediate. But if we proceed to infinity in efficient causes, there will be no first efficient cause, and thus there will be no ultimate effect, nor intermediate efficient causes, which is clearly false. So what is he saying here? He's saying, well, imagine this chain of events. First cause, intermediate cause, last cause. Now we just said that if you remove a cause, the effect is removed as well. So if you remove Ryan's parents from existence, you remove Ryan also. So imagine we suppose that this first cause never existed. Well, then it would also follow that the intermediate causes didn't exist. And if the intermediate causes didn't exist, then the last cause wouldn't exist. So what he's saying here is, if there is no first cause, then there would be nothing which comes after it. in fact, nothing would exist at all. If you remove the very beginning of the chain of events, then nothing can come after it. Another way of thinking about this is the following, right? If you ask yourself the question, how do we get to the present moment? Well, we got to the present moment because first this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and now here we are at the present. But if you take away the beginning of that chain of events, and you take away everything that came after it, then how can we get to the present? And so Aquinas' first fundamental claim here is that in order for anything to exist, in order for there to be any events at all in the universe, any efficient causes of change, there must be a first cause. But wait a minute, he says, if the universe is infinite, there is no first cause. Because remember, if the universe is infinite, if the universe is an infinite chain of events, then you just keep going back and back and back and back and back, and there's one thing causes another and another and another and so on forever. And there is no first cause. So if the universe is infinite, there's no first cause. If there's no first cause, nothing can come after, and nothing would exist. But wait a minute, things do exist. Therefore, the chain of causes must have had a first cause. It cannot be infinite. Okay, now, that's certainly a lot of metaphysical thinking to wrap your mind around, but if you just want to boil it down, it really just is the claim that with no beginning, we can't have whatever comes after the beginning. Now, I think there's some merit to this claim, and we're going to have much more opportunity to think about the concept of infinity and whether the universe is infinite in our next video. But I'll just flag here that I don't know if I find this justification to be completely convincing. I would agree with Aquinas that if there is a first cause, and you take that first cause away, then everything else that follows it would also not exist. But notice that's only true if there is a first cause. To some extent, Aquinas seems to assume that there's a first cause, and then say, wait a minute, if you take the first cause away, then nothing would exist. But remember, Aquinas is supposed to be proving that there's a first cause. And so we can't just say, well, if there's a first cause, then if you take that away, then where are all the intermediate causes, where are the last causes? He has to actually give us a reason to think there's a beginning. Because remember, I can paint a coherent picture of a universe that is infinite. And what I mean by a coherent picture is I can paint a picture of the universe where it's infinite and everything has a cause. There's no beginning, there's no starting point, but everything still is an explanation. It just goes back forever. A caused B, which caused C, which caused D, which caused E, which caused F, etc., 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 on forever with no beginning point. So there is something to what Aquinas is saying, but I'm not quite sure that he's given us enough reason here to think that in fact the universe can't be infinite. But like I said, we're going to have more opportunity to think about that in our next video. So for the moment, I sort of want to put that claim aside. Now, if you do accept those premises, let's just think first, where does that get us? So if you accept first that material things exist within a chain of efficient causes, nothing can cause itself, this chain of efficient causes cannot extend back infinitely. If all those things are true, then he draws the conclusion that there must be some first cause, what we're going to call a first efficient cause. The idea is if you go back far enough, tracing back what caused A, what caused that, there must be some first cause. And we see that Aquinas says that here, therefore it's necessary to suppose the existence of some first efficient cause. Now I want you to think for a moment about what we mean by first efficient cause. Right? Because you might first be tempted to ask the question, well, wait a minute, Aquinas is saying there must be a first efficient cause. Well, what brought the first efficient cause into being? Well, that would sort of misunderstand the claim he's making. Because if this first efficient cause really is a first cause, then it can't have been caused by anything. Because if the first cause was caused by something else, then whatever that other thing is would be the first cause. So he's not saying that there's something else out there which brought the universe into existence, but it was also caused. He is saying that there's something out there that's a first cause that wasn't caused by anything, and is responsible for the entirety of everything that exists. And you'll remember, I told you in the previous video that cosmological arguments are motivated by this question of why is there something rather than nothing? And for Aquinas, that explanation bottoms out in this first cause. The reason there is something, the reason there is a material or physical world, the reason that that material or physical world is arranged in an order of efficient causation is all because of this first cause. You'll also remember that I told you in a previous video that what cosmological arguments aim to do is prove that there is a unique being, something fundamentally different from anything else we encounter. And it also seems that the first cause would fit the bill. Can you think of anything else that you encounter that wasn't caused, that wasn't brought into existence by something? It doesn't seem you can. So if Aquinas has shown that there must be this first cause, an uncaused thing, then he truly has shown that there exists a unique being that is not like the other things we encounter in our world. So this at least is the first question. What is this unique being? It's the first efficient cause. Now, we already started to broach this question a little bit, right? Because there is the question again, where did the first efficient cause come from? Which I've suggested is sort of not the right question to ask, or it sort of misconstrues the issue. But let's make the options more explicit. Right, if you say, where did the first cause come from? You could say it was caused by something prior. But we just said, look, the first cause can't be caused by something prior. It wouldn't be the first cause then. So you say, okay, well, wait a minute. Are you trying to tell me that it was caused by itself? That the first cause brought itself into existence? Well, Aquinas can't say that, because he's already ruled out self-causation. And not just for material or physical things. Aquinas has said that nothing, it's a conceptual impossibility that something can cause itself. So we can't say the first cause is the cause of itself either. Now what does that leave us? I think it leaves us with the following option. The first cause was uncaused. That is to say, the first cause has always existed, it is eternal. So to say that something is uncaused just means that there was never a time when it didn't exist. It always existed, it was immortal, it was eternal. And this seems to be the only sort of explanation or answer Aquinas could give for where did the first cause come from. It didn't actually come from anywhere. It was just always there. And I think this again highlights the extent to which, if such a first cause exists, how it's a unique being utterly unlike anything else we encounter. Because not only do we not encounter things that are uncaused, everything we come across has a cause. But also, we don't encounter things that last forever. Everything in our life, all the things we own, all the people we know, our own lives, the houses we live in, everything has an end. It comes into existence and then someday it's destroyed. But if Aquinas is correct, what we have is a first cause that was uncaused and always existed. Again, utterly unlike anything else that we encounter in our world. Now, you'll notice at the very end of the argument from causation, he adds in there, this men call God, right? So he said there's a chain of efficient causation. To explain this, we need a first efficient cause. And he says this is what we call God. And of course, as I said, we have to ask the question, does he actually have enough warrant to say this? Do we know the first efficient cause is God? Well, I would say that based on the argument as it stands right now, not necessarily. But there are a few other things we can say. First, if you take what he's saying seriously, it does seem that this being is much different than the normal things we encounter, so that does move us in the direction of God. Also, if you take the second way, this argument from causation, in the context of his other four arguments for the existence of God, each can be seen as trying to prove a different thing about God, right? So some of the arguments focus on the idea that God is creator, others focus on the idea that God is the explanation of moral goodness. So you might say if you put them all together, maybe we get a more complete picture, which shows that this first cause is God. But still, I think it's worth asking the following question. Are there any other candidates for what this first cause could be? Maybe it is God. But are there any other candidates are there any other things that this first cause could be besides God? And I think this is one of the fundamental questions we really need to think about regarding this argument. One, again, is it possible for the universe to be infinite? As I said, we'll cover that in the next video. But also, are there other things that Aquinas could have, put it this way, suppose we think Aquinas really has hit on something with this idea that there's a first cause. Could something else really be what is going on there besides God? And I want to offer two different possibilities. Maybe there are others, but here's two sort of common answers to this question. Because when we're talking about this first cause and uncaused thing, sometimes philosophers will talk about entities of that sort as having a necessary existence. And what does that mean? So something has a necessary existence if that being has the following characteristics: if it's eternal, uncaused, and indestructible. And Aquinas looks at the first cause and says, okay, so we've got something that wasn't caused by anything else, that always existed, that can't be destroyed. You look around our world, nothing else exhibits those characteristics. And he says, seems like we're moving in the direction of God here. But the atheist could come back, the person who doesn't believe in God and wants to reject this argument, can come back and say, well, wait a minute, why can't we just say that the universe as a whole has those characteristics? I mean, certainly the things within the universe don't, right? Your car comes into existence and it's destroyed. People come into existence and then they die, right? Things within the universe don't have those characteristics. But why do we need to think that God is the necessary being, that God has necessary existence? Why can't the thing with necessary existence just be the universe itself? Why can't we just say that the universe, the totality of physical existence, just always was there, wasn't caused by anything, and will never be destroyed? And in fact, this very issue came up in a very famous debate on the existence of God between two philosophers. One we talked about previously in the first week of this course, Bertrand Russell. And he was having a debate on the existence of God with Frederick Copleston. And this exact point came up, right? Why think that God has to be the necessary being instead of the universe? And here's what Russell said, very famously said, look, here's my answer. The universe is just there and that's all. When I previously posed for you the question of why is there something rather than nothing, Bertrand Russell wouldn't say, well, we need to find an answer to that question, and the answer must be some sort of first cause which exists outside of space and time. No, he would just say, you have hit the limit of explanation. This is the point after which you can no longer ask why. He's just saying the existence of the universe is a brute fact. It's just there. There's nothing to explain it. There's nothing further to ask about. That's all there is. And if you give that answer, then it would make sense to say that maybe all Aquinas has shown here is that the universe exists, which, of course, we already knew. So that's one perspective. But the person he was arguing with, Frederick Copleston, said, Bertrand Russell is simply not taking the question of why there's something rather than nothing seriously. He says, we have to think that something like God must be the candidate for necessary existence. The candidate for something that's uncaused, eternal, and indestructible. Here's what Copleston says. He says, I can't see how you can rule out the legitimacy of asking the question how the total or anything at all comes to be. Why something rather than nothing? That is the question. And that is the thing you have to realize about the perspective Russell has put forth. Russell is willing to allow that there's some questions we can ask, but that simply we can't answer, and not just because we don't have the information, but simply because they're not answerable. There are no answers to them. Russell would say when you ask why is there something rather than nothing, you're asking a question which only makes grammatical sense. But there's no possible, it's not a question that can even have an answer in the first place, because the universe is just there and there's nothing further to investigate. But if you're like Copleston and you think, no, this answer needs a question, if you think that all questions of why at least have an answer, even if we don't know what it is, at least have an answer, then you have to ask this question as well. You have to ask why there's something rather than nothing. So in large part, I think what you might think about Aquinas' argument does come down to this question. Do you think the very existence of the universe itself needs an explanation? Or are you willing to say that the existence of the universe itself is just simply unexplainable, and there is no point in asking that specific question? So I will cut the video there. In our next video, we will look at a different version of the cosmological argument, and I think it's going to be a version of the cosmological argument which should hopefully allow us to shed some light on this question: can we think the universe is eternal? Can the universe be the answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing, or not? Okay, so I will stop there. Thank you for listening. I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.